interview with photographer Harold Sherrick on the 24th of October, 2019. Okay, speaking with photographer Harold Sherrick on the 24th of October, 2019. And Harold, great to talk to you.
Same to you, Stephen. How are you?
I'm doing okay. So the topic of our conversation is Stolen Moments. It's your first book of photography, collecting great photos from your illustrious career. And so tell me a little bit about it. How would you describe the book to someone who's never seen it?
Oh, it's a mixed bag of photos that I've done throughout the last probably 35 years, 40 years. And I just went about picking certain things that caught my eye, that I have a special memory of, or a moment, of. And, so it is a mixed bag. But I wanted to feature that because I didn't do a theme-based thing where it's just, a select group of artists. So I just chose, I just spent a lot of time going through my archive and just trying to pick out some photos that I thought would be interesting to someone who's not too familiar with photography or does have a love for it, and just to present my own stories, and my own experiences with various images that I've shot in the book.
Well, I think the title is pretty spot on, because there are a lot of, if you will, candids or stolen moments,
right,
among the images. There are a lot of great portraits too, but there are a lot of neat candids, and I think that's kind of if there's a theme that I can see, that's it. That there's a certain you have a way to be in a place with a camera in a certain way and be able, you're able to capture images kind of unobtrusively without really making a big deal about yourself. And I think, in a way, that's a classic approach to get a lot of great stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I've always wanted to be like a fly on the wall in various situations when I had my camera with me, and I tried not to be, in the way, so to speak. I've never done that, and most everything that I was at, I was always invited to. I was never, people have always quoted and always made fun and said, "Oh, you're a paparazzi," and frankly I resent that term, because I am not a paparazzi. My stuff is true to what I'm doing as far as shooting rock and roll, and I was invited. I had been invited to everything that I've ever shot. So I've always tried to capture something casual, something that the subject wasn't aware of.
There you go. Now, tell us a little bit about yourself. What was your initial encounter with photography that inspired you to do that as a career?
Well, my initial thing goes way back to when I was, really young, because my father was a newspaper man. He worked for the LA Herald Examiner, and ever since I can remember, when I was very, very young, he always took me down to the newspaper offices, and he took me around to various office, rooms in there, and the one room that did stick out was the photographers, offices, where all the photos were laying all over the desks, waiting for the evening edition to come out, and different shots were being used, whether it was sports or crime or, human interest. And it was all black and white in those days, and I have always had a great affection and love for black and white photography. And that always caught my eye, so I started playing with cameras, when I was about 7, 8 years old. I had a little Brownie Junior box camera, and I used to take that out when I was a kid and shoot my friends, or just shoot scenery things way back in the 60s, early 60s. So that's kind of the beginning right there. And then as time went on, I graduated up and was able to finally get a decent camera, but that wasn't for quite a while yet, probably in the early 80s or late 70s. And then I had a decent 35 millimeter, and that's when I really started getting serious about shooting music and different events, different musical events.
Do you remember what your first assignment was as a rock photographer?
Well, one of the first ones was, I shot Elvis Presley in '76, but it was a personal thing, and it was for somebody that wanted some photos, and I happened to get tickets through somebody who was a big Elvis person, and it was basically his last show he did a year before he died. The closest he came was Long Beach Arena. So I had taken a couple of shots. They didn't come out so great, but it was the experience is what made it good, because it gave me my first taste of actually getting into a crowd or getting, shooting from an audience thing on the stage or up to the stage. But the first real one, I think, was probably in the 80s. I did some work for what the heck was it? I did some work for a jazz record label, and I shot some studio stuff of Jay Canna drumming and doing a jazz session at Sage and Sound Studios in Hollywood in 1986. I mean, that was one of my earliest assignments. And then after that, I just did a long succession of photos for Music Connection magazine starting in 1988, and did the big show that they had in December '88, The Victim Against Violent Crime. It was Larry Carlton's benefit for Larry Carlton, and everybody showed up for that. So that was a nice gig. Everybody from Joni Mitchell to Lyle Lovett to Michael McDonald to Christopher Cross. A lot of people showed up for that, and that was a great photo gig.
Nice. Now I noticed that. I wanted to ask you about your gear. You had mentioned that you started off with a Brownie box camera and graduated later on to a halfway decent 35 millimeter. Tell me a little bit about your rig. What kind of cameras do you use? What kind of lenses do you like? What do you like to shoot when you're in low light, high? Give us kind of an overview of how you approach shooting a concert.
Shooting a concert back in the day, and even now, it's available light. You want to shoot available light. You don't shoot with flash. I've always shot with, ever since I had a decent camera. I shot before I bought the Nikons that I own now, that I've been shooting Nikon for 30 plus years. I was shooting with an Olympus OM10, and that was a nice camera too, and I still have the camera. But I just kind of fell in love with Nikons after that, and I just started buying Nikons in the 80s, and I still to this day shoot with Nikon. It's a Nikon digital, but I still have my Nikon film cameras. But I also shoot with a Mamiya 120, because I really love shooting medium format when I'm doing portraits or doing landscapes. Trying to think what else. So yeah, that's my rig there. I mean, other with a flash, but concert stuff is all available light. And in the old days, I used to just shoot 98% of the time. I was shooting black and white, because again, I have a love for that, and I still do to this day. I'm still old school. I still shoot film along with digital, because I just, I like the real deal as far as black and white goes, and I don't feel digital duplicates that entirely accurate.
Did you ever get into film developing or developing your own film?
I used to go in the darkroom with the guys that used to develop for me, and I learned little bits here and there, but I was never, to be honest, I was never an expert at that. I used to go in when I was printing, and I would be with the printer when he was printing to my specifications. Whether we had to burn and dodge or do any kind of stuff like that, and cropping or whatever I was printing at the time. So I learned a little bit about that. But I never really got into actually printing myself. I wish I had, but I just never, because I was so busy shooting all the time. I was in and out the door and running from one thing to another all the time. So I used to just drop my film at this couple of these labs or in this one printer that used to print for me. And so I didn't really take the time. I wish I had, like I said, but I didn't really take the time to really learn printing, so to speak.
Well, now I wanted to ask, because we talked a little bit about concerts and so forth. What do you think, in your experience, was the toughest shot to get that was like a money shot? A shot that you like really had to go through a lot of rigmarole to get, but it was really the one.
Yeah, wow, that's a toughie. the one that was a good money shot for me, I didn't really, it wasn't real hard, but the timing was everything. And you had to be right there when it happened, which I was. And I didn't realize that I was going to have the advantage I had, and I was thankful for it, don't get me wrong, but it was when I did, this is just one in particular, because there were a few, but the one I really got that was the money shot for me, and a wonderful shot, was when I was shooting Tori Amos at the Greek Theater. We weren't shooting the show itself, we were all called to be there during sound check in the afternoon. So what it was just me and about maybe 8 or 9 other photographers, and we were able to stand right at the edge of the stage, about 5-6 feet away from her and her grand piano, and she came out and said hello to us, sat there and just played a song for us, and we were able to get what we needed. The shots and stuff. So the money shot for me was that one. I mean, I got a lot of great things that day, but there's the one shot that I did get that ran in a couple of different publications right after that, and I got several phone calls stating how wonderful the shot was. And I saw that already as myself. I just thought this shot I was so proud of this photo, because to get this shot and her expression, you had to really keep your eye on her the whole time, because she's very animated.
This is the one where she's leaning back in the microphone.
She's leaning back, exactly. It just looks very orgasmic, I mean, if you want to, if that's a good description or not, but she was just so lost in the music and playing and singing and stuff, and I got that shot, and that's, I mean, that's one of my favorite shots.
Well, I'm glad you singled that out, because that is one of my favorite shots in the book. I think it's it's stunning. Both from an editorial standpoint and a technical standpoint. So
yeah, thank you. Yeah, I really was so happy when I got my proof sheets back and spotted that shot, and I was stoked. I was very pleased. Can you
recall any other situations that were kind of like that were just really special? And
well, the other one that's in the book now that you mention that again, is the other one that I kind of had to work for it, as far as just being where I was and being there, which I was very close, is the shot in the book of June Carter Cash with her head bowed slightly, her eyes closed, and her hands are resting on the auto harp. That was her gig she did at the Troubadour when her solo album came out. I think it was 1999, if memory serves me. And she was sitting up on a stool up there just playing, and she had this dramatic moment where she, I can't remember, I think it was the end of the song, and she strummed the last, chord of the thing, and she just bowed her head, her eyes were just closed for a second, and her hands were there, and I just snapped this great shot of it, and I just went, oh my God, this is it. And in fact, just a little anecdote, when I did get this printed up, because I sold a couple of prints of that shot later on, but when I did do it, I brought it over to Henry Diltz, and I showed Henry, and he just stopped dead in his tracks, took a double take, and he kept staring at it, and he goes, oh my God, he goes, Harold, this is beautiful. He goes, look at her hands. And I thought the same thing, because her hands, you could see the age and the lines in her hands, and you could tell from, her whole life she was, just how she was brought up and as a musician and stuff, and you could just see the age in her hands, and so that caught his eye as well as mine.
Well, that is a stunning photo. It's on page 145, and you really do see a lifetime of experience just in her hands, and when you consider who she is and her connection to the Carter family and Mother Maybelle and how deep and far back that goes.
Absolutely.
It's just an incredible photo. And then on the opposite page, on page 144, you have a photo of
her daughter, Carlene Carter. Yeah, I thought that was appropriate. I thought that was kind of nice.
Very good.
So to put them side by side,
Now, a couple of minutes ago, you said, I'm not a paparazzi photographer, and I really resent being called a paparazzi photographer, but there are a few photos in here that are kind of like, fanboy photos. I'm thinking in particular of the Joe Walsh photos, where it looks like you met him on the street and he was signing something and you got a couple of photos.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you call it that, but that was when he was at Rockline, and I knew he was going to be there that night, and I just drove down to the studios there, and we just waited till he pulled up in his turquoise Cadillac and jumped out, and he stopped, and he was signing for a couple people, and I was just there to try to get a couple of photos of him and chat with him for a minute, which I did, and then I snapped those 2 shots, and then he went into the studio. That was really about all that was. If you want to call it that's okay. It was one of those quick things like that. But he was very pleasant, and once I had what I wanted, I was out of there. I never made it a point to hang out at places like that and wait till they came out. So I got what I wanted. And I was happy,
Well, the book is full of rock stars, and then you get later on in the book to get to page 155, and there's a photo of Walter Cronkite.
I know.
No.
I know. Because I just thought, let's throw this in there just to kind of throw a curveball. Walter Cronkite to me was one of the greatest news anchormen there ever was, and I was always a big fan of his. And obviously my father watched him every night when he got home from work. The CBS Evening News, as well as myself. And I just remember all the historic stories he reported on, everything from the Kennedy assassination to the Democratic Convention in '68, the riots. So to me, he was just such an iconic person. I know he wasn't a musician, but he just made such an impact on me, because when I met him and took a bunch of different photos, he was just, he was everything that I thought he was. He had integrity, he was classy, he had manners, he was just incredible, larger than life, I guess you can say. And so I just figured, I asked my publisher, and I said, let me throw this in as a thing. Do you think that's okay? He said, yeah, do it. It's kind of off the wall, and maybe it'll make a great conversation piece. So that's why I stuck him in there.
Well, I think with your news junkie background and the fact that to a lot of people, especially us media folks, we could call Cronkite a rock star as it relates to news anchors. So I don't think it's inappropriate for him to be in here at all.
Great. Well, I didn't either. I just wanted to kind of do it as an off the wall thing to see if I could just just start a conversation with somebody like that on why I stuck him in there. But he to me, he deserves it. He was just and I hate to use the word icon, but I'm going to use it anyway. But he's just legendary, in the news field, as you know.
Now, the book closes. The last photo on page 156 is a photo of Tim Fowley standing out in front of the Roxy.
Right.
In his later years. Now, Tim Fowley was quite a character in L.A. rock in the 70s and the 80s. And so what was your relationship with him, or how did you encounter him? And also bring Harvey Kubernick into the picture here, because I know he and Fowley were pretty close back in the 70s and 80s, and were involved in a lot of projects together.
Yeah. Now I worked for Kim. Besides taking photos of him, I actually worked with him and worked for him for the last probably 6 years of his life. I used to go over to his place, his apartment over in West Hollywood, and actually help him with things, because he, at that point in his life, he was sick at that time with cancer, but he was still up on his feet up until the last 3 years before he died, 4 years, whatever, where he was basically bedridden. And I would go over there and just help him with paperwork, answer phones for him, run errands for him, go get his mail at his P.O. box, and if he really needed to go anywhere in the earlier times before he was bedridden, I would take him everywhere. We'd go to recording sessions, we'd go to photo shoots, and interviews that he did, and I would just be there with him, hanging out, taking photos. He was always very good and very generous, and paid me very well for my time.
So he has a reputation as kind of a hard ass and not a very pleasant person. What your experience with him? It sounds like it wasn't that way.
Well, he was that way, but I think when and I can only speak for myself, but I established a great relationship with him where he genuinely liked me and I liked him. So, without given the fact that he had that outer crust of where he could be really nasty and filthy and everything like that, he didn't direct that at me directly. He would talk that way, he would do that, but the beautiful thing about Kim Fowley is he never bullshitted you. If he didn't like something about you, no matter what it was, he'd tell you. He never played games like people do nowadays. They're afraid to say something. If he was critical of something, if he didn't like something about you, he'd just tell you straight out. And a lot of people couldn't handle that, because he didn't necessarily do it to be offensive. But if he didn't like the way you sang, like if he was auditioning people to sing at his place when I was there, he'd tell you. He'd say, no, you don't sing good, or you don't do this. He said, try it this way, or write the lyrics this way. I don't like the lyrics you wrote. Go change this verse. I mean, he was very direct with people, and people that were really hip to him and knew him understood that and didn't let it bother them, because that's how I got along so great with him, because I could take what he said, because he was being brutally honest, but he never pulled any punches with you.
Now, where does Harvey Kubernick fit into the picture here?
Well, not in my case. In my situation, no. When I was working with him, Harvey really wasn't involved. I mean, he would talk to Harvey on the phone now and then, but I guess Harvey, was doing things with him in the 70s, maybe early 80s. I'm not sure. I don't know the whole history, but after a while, Harvey didn't see him that much towards the end and stuff, because Harvey started doing his own books and stuff, and I think Harvey got a little swelled head about his own stuff, and he kind of distanced himself from Kim a little bit. But they would talk on the phone occasionally and stuff. But Kim, and this is, I don't know if you want to include this in the thing or not. I don't know if we should, but off the record, Kim never thought Harvey was a great writer. He always thought that Harvey wrote too many words, too many things. He said he writes too many things in there that says a whole lot of nothing, he used to say. He said he needs a good editor, because he said he was not a great writer. And that's between you and I, Stephen.
Dude, it's on the record, man.
It's on the record, okay.
It's on the record. No,
okay.
It is what it is. And, he said what he said, so...
That's just true. Okay.
All right. So,
okay.
So, and speaking of other controversial figures you worked with, Phil Spector. Now, tell us about your work with him and what that was like. I got into Phil's inner circle, as you want to say it, through the Kessel brothers, through David and Dan Kessel, preferably David, because David Kessel and I went to high school together. So David and I have known each other since 1969, and I got to be really good friends with him then. And then we lost touch after we graduated, and I know he was full bore with Phil at that time, because he was doing all those sessions with Phil, everything from the rock and roll sessions with Lennon to Leonard Cohen, to all that stuff that Phil was doing. And so I lost touch with David till probably about late 80s, maybe 1991. I reconnected with David and Dan. And then they called me and said, hey, do you want to shoot for Phil? He needs a guy. We know you, we told Phil that you can be trusted, to come in and this and that. And I said, absolutely, I'll be there with bells on, I told him. So I started shooting for Phil in 93. And the first big kind of gig I did was when it was at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in LA at the ceremony. And Phil came with the guys, and that was the first time I really had taken a bunch of different shots of them at the time there during the ceremony.
and then I was just basically employed by him off and on a couple of times in the 90s, but then it went really full time, like in 99, 2000, when Phil started having his parties again, his his bowling parties, and then Phil hired me to come up and just shoot his parties and hang out,
Bowling.
which I did. I did all the way until he got himself, in trouble with the whole, murder thing. So
bowling parties.
Yeah.
Tell us about a bowling party at Phil's.
The bowling parties were held at Phil would rent out a small little bowling alley that was in Montrose, California, just above Glendale, like Glendale Annex, I think that's what they call it. And he would have these parties in the summertime. And then, of course, he had a guest list, and he invited, all the people that he liked that knew him. And invitation only type of thing. You couldn't just walk in. He had security at the door, and you had to be, you had to be on the list, so to speak. And it was in this funky little bowling alley. It looked like it was built in the 40s or 50s. It was great, and there was a little old-fashioned little hamburger grill inside there, and everybody got to eat. He had food provided, but it was a good old-fashioned hamburger, fries, onion rings, hot dogs, sodas. I think they had beers there too. I think there was liquor there, if I remember correctly. And you could bowl if you wanted to, or you could just sit around and talk, because there was people that would come around and just mingle, So everybody from Marvin Mitchelson was there. What's his name? Dennis Dragon. Who else? Michael Oakes. All kinds of people. Humble Harv showed up at one of the parties. In fact, I have a great photo I took of Humble Harv and Phil together. And that's what consisted of these parties. Is this just you were just coming up, you hang out, you ate, you chatted with everybody. You could bowl a game if you wanted to. That was optional. Some people did, of course. And I just took pictures of Phil with all the people that came. They would line them up, and Phil would say, "Oh, here, Harold, I need a shot of so-and-so with me," and boom, I was just taking photos all night besides eating and chit-chatting myself. I was just shooting photos all night for him.
Tough gig.
Yeah, it was fun, boy. I miss those days, let me tell you.
Well, let's flash forward now to the book. How did the Stolen Moments project come about? At what point did you say, okay, it's time for me to put together a book, and how did you find the publisher, and kind of give us the story of how it came about?
Yeah, okay, the story is, in a nutshell, I guess, as quick as I can think of, is people have been saying to me for the last 6, 7, 8 years, whatever, "Oh, why don't you put out a book? Why don't you put out a book?" And I'd say, well, I'd love to, but the time isn't right yet, and I was looking around at various publishers, or at least inquiring, and really getting no responses. And I met this publisher, Stephen Booth, at Genius Books, from John D'Amore, who was good friends with Stephen and had worked with him on his own books. And but John didn't publish with Stephen, but Stephen had put the books together for him. As far as, I guess, he did book design, and he knew how to actually put a book physically together. And then John D'Amore self-published his own books. But I met him through John. John gave me a great recommendation. He said, call him and see what he says. He said he's always looking for new things, and he publishes basically a lot of true crime. But this is his first photo book that he's published with me. So I called him, we hit it off, and after a few phone calls, and I showed him samples of my work and some things, and gave him my bio, he said he was interested in doing something, and he sent me the contracts, and I guess the rest is history.
Now, but putting it together, a little bit about the production process. You referenced some of the folks that help you prepare the photos and. Yeah.
You're right. I'm sorry. As far as preparing stuff, Gary Strobel was an intricate part of that. He had been helping me all along. Anyway, Gary and I have known each other for 30 plus years. He would help scan a lot of different things for me. here a little retouching here and there on certain things that were like dirty or scratched up or something. Not that many were, but he was always there for that. He was very meticulous about that and very detail oriented. He's just that way, and he always made sure that my images, as well as Henry's, because that's what he does for Henry. But he always made sure my images looked the best they could, and they weren't artificial anyway. It was just that he just made sure that they were as clean as a whistle and looked as natural as they were supposed to be from a negative or a slide. So Gary was a real big part of that. We spent many a night or many a weekend going through things, and me bringing things over and him scanning and retouching and getting things prepared for this. And then, of course, working with Steven, too. I had to work with Steven because I'm on the East Coast and he's on the West Coast, so we did a lot of the Zoom or the Skype or whatever you want to call that. So we would do that visually in putting this thing together as far as the layout was concerned. And we spent, many hours doing that several times just to get this thing prepared and laid out properly. So that probably took, I think the whole process took, as far as with Steven and I, it probably took a good 8-9 months, maybe a little less here and there, but roughly about that much time to get it prepared and ready and then sent to press.
Well, let's wrap it up. I want to talk a little bit about the cover photo.
Okay.
The cover photo of Tom Petty and a beautiful Rickenbacker guitar. Tell me a little bit about where this was taken, the circumstances of the photo, and how it wound up to be chosen as the cover shot.
The shot was taken at the LA Forum. It was November 2002 when the album The Last DJ came out. And trying to think. So that particular show, that's when Jackson Browne opened for him. And we were backstage waiting to go into the pit and stuff. It was a very, very nice gig, very low-key holiday weekend thing, even though it was sold out. Basically, I'm pretty sure the gig was sold out. But it was only myself and one other photographer. I think it was Steve Granitz. Was a photographer I used to know many, many years ago in Hollywood. I think he's still shooting there. But he and I were literally the only two photographers in the pit. There was nobody else. And just before we were about to go out into the pit, Tom's assistant came out, or somebody that actually worked closely with Tom came out and told myself and this other photographer that we could shoot the whole show. And there wasn't going to be a 3-song limit. And we could stay as long as we liked and shoot the whole show if we liked, which we were ecstatic about because, they just didn't, in those, well, even now especially, they just don't let you do that. Everything is always cut short. Everything has such a time limit. So I didn't stay the whole show because I ran out of film, but I stayed half the show, and I shot everything that I brought with me, which was quite a bit of stuff. And Tom would always come, because this was like the third or fourth time I had shot Tom over the years, and he always seemed to come over to the edge of the stage when he saw us and almost made an effort to, I don't think he consciously did it on purpose, but he always made an effort to come off and almost look like he was just going to pose for us for a second. So that particular shot, he came right over towards me, and I just nodded and said, "Hello, Tom," and he stood there, dropped his hands, smiled, and I caught this shot, and I thought, this is it. This is one of the best, I mean, I like a lot of my stuff, but I mean, that shot was just great. And I always had that shot in mind, no matter if I was going to do a book or if I was going to, use it in a gallery show, which I have. But for the book, I just right away, I thought, well, I really want to use this. I mean, it's the occasion, of course, was sad because Tom had passed away the year before, or when I was thinking, but I thought, no, I gotta use this shot. It's just, to me, it takes my breath away. It's just a great shot.
And he has an autograph on the strike plate there in his guitar. Whose is that?
God, I can't remember. Somebody told me that too. I didn't notice it right away until I thought it was his thing. I thought it was his own signature. I thought it was a Tom Petty Rick, but I'm probably wrong. But I know that my publisher said he saw that thing too, and I had never really noticed that. So I'll be honest with you, I can't, from memory, my memory doesn't, I don't remember what it says on there. I thought I had said Tom himself, his own name, but I'm probably wrong.
Well, I'm looking at it with a loop right now, and I can't quite make it out.
Yeah.
But anyway, that would be great to find out who that is.
Yeah, I'll try to do that. Yeah, that's great.
Well, Harold, do appreciate your time. Great project. Very much enjoyed it. And
thanks, Stephen. Appreciate it.
Enjoyed our chat. Any parting shots? Any final comments? Oh yeah. How can people get your book? Tell us that.
People can get the book on. You can order it through Amazon. Not unfortunately, but on Amazon, the way they have it fixed is Amazon. You get the paperback. They don't sell the hardback on Amazon. Now, hardbacks will be for sale out when I'm out there in January, and I think they're going to be in a couple of bookstores. I think the publisher is planning on getting them in Book Soup and in Vroman's in Pasadena. And in fact, I think those are the two places that they're trying to set up book signings for me in January, because I'm out there in January, the middle of January. I don't have dates yet, but it is the middle of January, the same time as the NAMM show, because I'll be at NAMM shooting. But they are setting 2 or 3 book signings. Also, Norm's Rare Guitars in Tarzana. I am doing one there. I know that for sure because Norm, the owner of that place, was a real tight friend with Tom Petty, and Tom and him used to do all the charity stuff for the Midnight Mission downtown L.A. Tom would donate a lot of his money and a lot of time to help the homeless and the people and feed people down at the Midnight Mission. So they want to do a signing there because I'm going to donate. There's a poster of the book too that's going to be sold or given. If somebody buys a hardback, there'll be a poster that'll be given to you right along with the book, and it's a poster of the cover of the book, of the image of Tom, but it's got a listing of some of the artists that I shot that are in the book. So that's going to happen too. Again, dates will come soon, but I don't have the actual dates yet. Stephen Booth, my publisher, will have the dates shortly. So if anybody wants to contact the publisher for any details or ordering a hardback or if they want to do it that way, that's great. If not, it's available on Amazon.
All right, sounds good. Thanks so much, Harold.
Stephen. Hey, Stephen, thanks for even thinking of me. I'm very grateful. I appreciate it. I appreciate everything.
My pleasure. Great work, and we'll see you.
And I'll see you when I get out there.
Definitely, we'll see you in January.
Perfect, Stephen. Thank you so much again.
All right, mate.
All right, have a great day. Bye-bye.